Palworld has taken the world by storm, and a lot of people are very mad about it, and I think it's an interesting topic to talk about. I know I'm a little bit late on this, most of the hype has probably died down by the time this video even goes up, but I still do think that it's an interesting concept to talk about, because the accusations of AI are unfounded, as far as I know, but that doesn't mean that it's not an interesting use case to discuss. So, for anybody who's been living under a rock for the past couple of weeks, Palworld has released, and Palworld is a survival RPG with Pokemon in it that can shoot each other. The biggest controversy started when people started comparing some of the Palworld characters to some of the Pokemon characters. Mainly things like this guy looking a lot like Luxray, which, yes, it does. And people started to take that a little bit further and say that this guy, called Lamball, looked a lot like Wooloo. And dare I say, they're both generic sheep. What do you want? And there's a whole spectrum of Pokemon and Pals in between those two examples. Like, some of them are very egregious, just blatant knockoffs, and some of them are just very generic animals in both series, which you're gonna have some of that, right? And there's a lot of in-between cases. Not here to talk about any of that and cast judgment on that. For the most part, I do think it is clearly evident that these designs, for the most part, have been made to poke at Pokemon and annoy the ever-living hell out of the Pokemon company. I'm not too interested in discussing that. What I am interested in is the accusations that the designs have been AI generated, because there's a lot of designs shown in early trailers, and those trailers predate the existence of usable generative AI. So at least those designs have not been AI generated, but let's just say that they were. Let's just say that everything we've seen in early trailers was handmade, but then when generative AI came around, they started to use that to speed up their work process. And like the second half of characters that we haven't seen in trailers before are AI generated designs. I still think that there is a lot of nuance to that, and to a certain extent that might not even be necessarily a bad thing. Matter of fact, I'm just going to say this here, and maybe some people are not going to like this. I do something very similar for my own game, and I've also been working for a while in the background on a Pokemon style game. I'm not going to go into much detail here about it, but I've got some ideas. And for those, both the monsters in my current game and the monsters in that Pokemon-like ID that I have for some time down the line, a part of the design process for those is talking to ChatGPT and having it generate some images that I can work off of. And as someone who has this very workflow, I'm here to tell you that if you are working with like more than just yourself, that's a terrible idea, because what I can do is I have in my mind what it should approximately look like. ChatGPT helps me to generate images based on the explanations that I give it, to visualize that and like just kind of snapshot things out of my brain in a very noisy way. Like, it doesn't take out of my brain what I want, but if I make it generate like 10 different images, they all have elements of what I originally had in mind, and I can use those as references and fill in the gaps a little bit while modeling the actual character, and that helps with the whole creative process. Now imagine that you have a director or a designer or whatever, somebody who is in charge of having the IDs for the characters, but then it gets given to a 3D artist, somebody else entirely. Suddenly this workflow now does no longer work, because the only reason that it works in my workflow is because I am the one talking to ChatGPT with the ID for the characters, kind of like saving the things from my brain into my computer, and then I am also the one to take those images and put them into a 3D model, knowing what my original intentions were. If those two tasks are done by different people, that creative consistency falls apart. So that no longer works. And what's even more important is that AI is actually really bad for making concept art. Again, as somebody who's used it in a way that could be described as concept art, I really don't think it is concept art. I'll get back to that in a minute if I don't forget. What is important for concept art is in this workflow where it's not the same person coming up with the design and actually creating the 3D model. That's where concept art is a translation layer. It is a layer where an artist takes the idea and makes like sketches or drawings of the character from multiple perspectives, making sure they're consistent so the 3D artist can then take those, look at them, and reference them as they're working on the actual character. You might see where I'm going with this. If you're using AI, the one thing AI generated images are really, really bad at is being consistent. If you talk to an AI to generate a character and you get a character that you like and you say, okay, but now I want this character from the side, they're going to, at best, make a slightly different character, and at worst, just an entirely unrelated image. Of course, you can prevent this by taking some of the images that you like and training a new model only on those images, and then doing that a couple of loops around until you have a model that is specifically going to generate designs of that specific character. You can do that, but at that point, somebody needs to sit there and check through the outputs of the AI image generator and then feed those back in and do that 4, 5, 6 loops around. And if you're just doing that for every single character, that's also not like time or cost productive. If you're doing that, you might as well just hire an artist, because that would be, in the end, potentially cheaper. All that to say though, is that I think that the actual use case for AI for this kind of thing is very limited. And the moment your team starts growing, you very quickly run into issues with it. For smaller teams, which I do believe Pocket Pair, the studio that works on this, the team that made Palworld, is relatively small, so there's a good chance that the person that came up with the designs is also the person that's modeling them. So for that, it probably would work to have AI in that workflow in some way, shape or form. So then we get to the fact whether or not that's a problem to begin with, because I don't think that it is. If you're in a team that's small enough that the person coming up with the designs is also the person creating the assets, you're probably not going to have a concept artist to begin with for every single one of these characters. Because as I said before, a large portion of what a concept artist does is translating IDs from the person coming up with the IDs into visuals that a 3D artist in this case, can use in order to make the assets that end up in the eventual game. And this is where we get back to my comments about the way I use generative AI images. I don't really think it's concept art, because it doesn't do that. It's something for me to bounce back and forth on, something for me to generate inspiration, and something for me to help me visualize ideas I have in my head before I start working on it in 3D. That's a wildly different use and context than what a concept artist usually creates. So where I think the big difference for me personally lies, and this is a very personal line to draw. I think everybody watching this video is going to have their own opinions on this, and please do let me know those opinions, because I would be very interested to see what people think, and more importantly, why people think that. If you're going to comment on this video, please do also include a reasoning as to why, and not just announce your opinion, because just announcing your opinion isn't exactly productive. Explain to me and everybody else in the comments why you think the way you do, and try to avoid, on either side of the argument, try to avoid talking points, like the regurgitated talking points, like AI is theft. Like, yeah, to a certain extent it is, but it's more complicated than that. On the other side, AI learns the same way humans do, so it's okay. Yeah, kind of, but it's more complicated than that, right? So try to avoid those talking points and try to think through your reasoning and why you feel the way you do and why you have the opinion you do, and try to communicate that to each other. I am very open to people having different opinions from me on this, but I will say, if you get rude to either like myself, which I don't care that much about, or other people in the comments, your comments are going to get removed and you're going to get blocked. So just don't be rude. Let's keep this civil. So anyway, what is the big difference, at least to me, between all the examples I've given so far? Well, the difference is that I think the line probably should be drawn, in my opinion, at using AI-generated assets. Using AI as a tool to improve your creativity, using AI as a tool to like discuss IDs with, which includes visual IDs, in my opinion is kind of fine. Let's take this back into a 2D game instead of a 3D game. The moment you start talking to ChatGPT and ask it to generate a sprite sheet for your character, that then becomes more of a problem. I don't like that, because at that point you are not really involving yourself creatively in this anymore. But there's also middle grounds in there, right? If you take like 10, 20 different AI generated images and you take the elements from each of them that you like and you go into Photoshop and you composite them together, well, now you've actually, like, again, made something with your own creative decision making and your own creative input. So that's kind of fine. And before you say, yeah, okay, but the images you picked are still AI generated and that is theft, I'm here to tell you that taking pre-existing images and like compositing them into a new image output is an entire art form that's already being done with non-AI generated images. So if anything, it's probably more fine to do with AI generated images, because you're not taking like actually like an image that somebody else made and using that. But all of this definitely, like, legally, I'm not a lawyer, but from what I understand, like the Photoshop art form thing, which I don't know the name of off the top of my head, is like legally distinct enough and transformative enough to fall under fair use. So if you're doing that with AI generated stuff, it can only be more fair use and more transformative compared to the original input that the AI was trained on. Now, do I think that AI should be trained on copyrighted images without any compensation? No, of course not. I think that people who are getting their stuff taken for AI to be trained on should receive some form of compensation. But I also think that it's quite a complex issue, because how do you calculate how much that is worth? But that gets into a whole separate discussion about AI model training, which I'm happy to do a video on at some point, or maybe we can chat about that on a live stream. If you guys want to join in on one of my live streams, and we can chat about that. But for now, I think that I'm going to wrap up this video. And we've talked about the uses of AI and how it could potentially make sense in a workflow for character design specifically, and what may be useful, what may not be useful, what may be ethical, what may not be ethical. And I'm going to leave it to you guys to continue the discussion. So go down into the comments below. Once again, do be civil about it, because you will be removed if you're not. And I will probably also be jumping in there and talking to you guys even further in less of a one-way street than making a video is. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page. And a special thanks to my Cave Digger tier Patreons, Sir J. Thomas,